I have some very sad news for all of you, and that is that Martin Luther King was shot and was killed tonight in Memphis.
The year 1968 was a pivotal year in American politics and in American history. What was happening in Vietnam was the primary focus of the news. Every night we got to watch the news. The body count was increasing. In February, the Tet Offensive was just increasing the intensity of the war in Vietnam. March 16, 1968, Bobby Kennedy felt that he was compelled to run for the presidency of the United States. He announced his candidacy that day.
Are broadcasting this morning the announcement of Democratic Senator Robert F. Kennedy of New York that he will be a candidate for the presidency.
I am announcing today my candidacy for the presidency of the United States. I run to seek new policies to end the bloodshed in Vietnam and in our cities.
Just 15 days later, Lyndon Johnson decided against staying in the race and withdrew, told his party that he...
I shall not seek, and I will not accept the nomination of my party for another term as your president.
March 31st, Lyndon Johnson announced to the nation in a surprise move that he was not going to become a nominee of the Democratic Party for the 1968 presidential election. Within the week, Martin Luther King was assassinated. Bobby Kennedy gave the eulogy, which is very well known, and Bobby Kennedy entered the race. June 4th was the primary. June 4th at the Ambassador Hotel, Bobby Kennedy had his campaign headquarters. On May 18th, 1968, Sirhan Sirhan, who lived in the house behind me, made an entry in his diary that killing Bobby Kennedy was an obsession. In his diary, he went on to say, repeated after repeated lines of RFK must die, RFK must die. Robert Blair Kaiser wrote that famous book titled RFK Must Die. Sirhan went to a gun range during the weeks before the assassination. His brother Munir, his only surviving relative, his other brothers and sisters are all gone, and his parents are all gone. But Munir still lives here, and he's looking forward to having Sirhan come home after he's released on parole.
There are just things that boggle the mind that should be looked into. If all of this leads to where we suspect it's going to lead, we don't want it to ever happen again.
Sirhan went to the gun range several times during the weeks before the assassination. His brother Munir had purchased for him a .22 caliber 8-shot Iver Johnson pistol. That's the gun that he took with him to the Ambassador Hotel that night. Sirhan came to see Bobby Kennedy speak on June 2nd at the same location, the Ambassador Hotel. And that day, he went to the gun range. It was a Sunday, but the gun range was closed. Disappointed, he went down to see Bobby Kennedy speak. He had his gun with him, but yet no attempt to kill Bobby Kennedy on that day. Why not? Maybe it appeared that Sirhan had to be certain that Bobby Kennedy won the California primary, giving him a clear path to the Democratic nomination before he would kill RFK. The day of the assassination, June 4th, at 11:30 a.m., Sirhan arrived at the gun range. He was firing all day up until 5 o'clock when they closed. During that time, he engaged in what they call rapid fire, which is not permitted on the gun range. Rapid firing. You're not allowed to do that. He had been there 6 times prior to that and never did rapid firing, but he only did rapid firing on the day of RFK's murder. When he left, the range master and Sirhan got into a heated argument because Sirhan knew better. And that night at the Ambassador Hotel, Sirhan was seen hanging around with a very attractive woman. This is the woman that everybody described as wearing the white polka-dotted dress. It was a white dress with black polka dots. And you can hear many people describing this woman in the polka dot dress that was with Sirhan that night. She was accompanied by a good-looking young man. The man was what many people thought an actor. He was strikingly good-looking. Let's hear some of the comments made by people who saw them that night.
We're waiting, and they said, "Are you Dr. McBroom?" And I said, "Yes." And they said, "Well, come with us." And then we went through the kitchen. And it was there that when I first saw Sirhan sitting on a serving table, looking very morose and so on. Of course, I could have no way of knowing what bizarre plan he had in his mind. I was, as I said, standing on a raised, elevated platform for the American Broadcasting System's television cameraman. And he and I, and another, my insurance man, a man named Sam, were standing there, and of course Senator Kennedy stepped back through the drapes on the stage. Shortly after he stepped back through the drapes with his wife and Jesse Unruh and some other, and P.S. Salinger, you heard the pow, pow, pow. And about this time, the woman in the polka dot dress ran out of the kitchen saying, "We got him, we got him." I was interviewed by the Federal Bureau of Investigation agents twice. I was interviewed by a black sergeant from the LAPD from a unit called Senator, which had been set up particularly to investigate the assassination. And the thing that impressed me most was the FBI men saying to me, and they said, well, we can't kind of forget what you saw. We can't bring Bobby back, and this has international implications. And I had really thought, to be frank with you at the time, that Saud of Saudi Arabia may have been in on it or something. And I wasn't sure that whether Sirhan was a Cuban or an Arab. Later, I talked to Bugliosi, who was the deputy district attorney, and his chief investigator. I also have spoken with Mayor Bradley, and I've spoken with Supervisor Kenneth Hahn's chief investigator, and told them exactly what had happened. And one of the things that has really got me over these years is they would have you believe that one bullet zoomed off the walls, zoomed off of people, and did all the damage and hit all these people, and that Sirhan alone did all this. As I stepped into the kitchen, there was a man there, and it's in some of the records. His gun was out. A tall, skinny, hawk-nosed white man. His gun appeared to be smoking to me. I think I read somewhere that his gun had not been fired, or they couldn't prove it or something. And it is my sincere belief, I will take it to my grave, that he's the one who shot Senator Kennedy in the back of the head. What I actually saw, and the things that have been disputed about the woman in the polka dot dress. The woman definitely ran out and said, we got him, we got him. Of course, nobody understood exactly what the hell she was talking about. She ran off to the right, out of the kitchen, into the crowd.
This girl came running down the stairs in the back, came running down the stairs and said, we've shot him, we've shot him. And I says, who did you shoot? And she says, we shot Senator Kennedy. She had on a white dress with polka dots. She was light-skinned, dark hair, and she has a funny nose. I thought it was really funny. All my friends tell me I'm so observant. She had on a white dress with polka dots. She was light-skinned, dark hair. She had black shoes on, and she has a funny nose. And after that, a boy came down with her. He was about 23 years old, and he was Mexican-American, because I can remember that because I'm Mexican-American.
Statement. Is that I think you owe it to Senator Kennedy, the late Senator Kennedy, to come forth, be a woman about this. If he, and you don't know, and I don't know whether he's a witness right now in this room watching what we're doing in here, don't shame his death by keeping this thing up. I have compassion for you. I want to know why. I want to know why you did what you did. This is a very serious thing.
I've been those people.
No, Sandy. Remember what I told you about that you can't say you saw something when you didn't see it? Sandy, look, I can explain this to the investigators where you don't even have to talk to them, and they won't talk to you. I can do this. But please, in the name of Kennedy,
I don't want to name a Kennedy for any of this business.
you know that this is wrong. You might want to be pushing it off with a smirk on your face, with a smile, but you know that deep inside what you...
Quite hysterical, very hysterical, and were spontaneous. The woman stated that she and her husband were just outside the embassy room when a young couple in their late teens or early 20s came running by in a state of glee, very excited, very happy, shouting we shot him, we killed him. And the woman says, who did you kill? And the young lady said, Kennedy, we shot him, we killed him. I immediately put out a broadcast with the description of the suspects, male and a female Caucasian, the female Caucasian wearing a polka dot dress. And he said, well, I want you to stop putting out that broadcast. Suspects, words of effect, the suspect's in custody. He didn't want to make a conspiracy out of it, or didn't want anyone to make a conspiracy out of it.
Now, this is everything that took place in the pantry during the shooting from behind Robert Kennedy. So what that would have shown, the interesting part about that would have been, you would have seen, if there were a second gun, you would have seen the position of everyone. Most important, you would have seen the position of Robert F. Kennedy when the shooting took place.
Scott Enyart was a 15-year-old amateur photographer and Kennedy supporter. Within minutes of the assassination, the LAPD went to extraordinary lengths to get hold of his film.
I looked up to see a shotgun. I looked up to see guns drawn all around me. They took my wallet. They took my camera. They took the film out of my pockets. They took me and they tossed me into the back of a squad car, which was sitting out right in front of the entrance. And I was not allowed to look at the film. They took this stack of prints, and one of the detectives shuffled through them and separated it into two piles. And basically, he gave me the photographs from one roll of film leading up to the assassination, and then everything after the assassination. Everything that I had taken in the pantry was gone.
Those photographs, which might have either proved or destroyed the prosecution case, had been incinerated by order of the LAPD.
If the police department was right, then my photographs only would have proved that they were right. So for them to destroy it only leads me to believe that that something's being covered up.
There were three people that just didn't fit. They were not as happy as everyone else. They had sour faces, and there was just something about them that just didn't rub me right. And I had told a friend of mine about their presence, and later on I saw them in the pantry when I first went through, and I saw the short person who turned out eventually to be Sirhan, and I saw a taller gentleman and a lady, a very well-built lady with a white polka dot dress on.
It was very unusual in that we had been informed there would be no security at the Ambassador. I say very unusual because when any person of state came into the city, there was at least a minimum deployment of security personnel.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So, my thanks to all of you, and now it's on to Chicago, and let's win there. Thank you very much.
When he started to shoot, the other two turned and ran to a side door, and I said then, they're getting away.
He felt responsible for what was happening in Vietnam. And as a person who was involved in the anti-war movement for several years up to that point, it's one of the reasons I supported him, because I felt he was the only candidate who could end the war.
That we can start to work together. We are a great country, and a selfish country, and a compassionate country. And I intend to make that my basis for running and over the period of the next few months.
that point, we turned to go to a press conference for the print media in the colonial room beyond the pantry.
I said to myself, Sirhan, you're going to die for this crime. God damn it, face up to it. At least admit it. Make it worthwhile to your own self. And I tried and tried and tried, to recollect it, to reenact it. But God damn it, nothing comes up.
Parole hearings always went in a bad direction. Once the witnesses and once Sirhan's attorneys began to discuss the evidence, the members of the Parole Commission always rebelled against that by saying, we're not here to discuss the evidence, but yet his attorneys continued to discuss the evidence. And that really angered the commissioners, the panel. Sirhan had no chance. This time, though, he changed attorneys, and it was a different approach. It was totally based upon remorse, sorrow, and regret. And Sirhan says, I certainly regret, I'm certainly remorseful for everything I did, for everything I started, because I began the chaos, I began the commotion, which allowed somebody else to kill Bobby Kennedy. And for that, yes, he's guilty. Sirhan said that he didn't know anything about the assassination. He was willing to accept guilt for firing at Robert Kennedy, but he's not willing to accept guilt for killing Robert Kennedy. All of the witnesses describe Sirhan as always being in front of Bobby Kennedy. But Bobby Kennedy was killed from a shot coming from behind. Thomas Noguchi, the coroner, said that Robert Kennedy was killed by a gunshot wound fired from a gun 1.5 inches behind his right ear. The powder residue and the impact of the bullet was conclusive proof that Bobby Kennedy was killed from a shot from behind. Sirhan never got behind Bobby Kennedy. Sirhan was at the closest 2 to 3 feet in front of Bobby Kennedy, and some people said when he was firing, he was 6 feet or 10 feet in front of Bobby Kennedy. Never fired at him from behind. During his firing, Sirhan struck and injured 5 people. He wounded 5 bystanders, and 3 shots ended up in the walls, door jambs, ceiling. None of Sirhan's bullets struck Bobby Kennedy. Robert Kennedy was struck and killed from gunshots from behind. This is the San Gabriel Valley Gun Club. Up and down this row, there were tables for the firers, for their equipment, for them to fire into the mountainside. On June 4th, 1968, Sirhan showed up here at 11:30 a.m. He began firing for 5.5 hours until 5 o'clock. And he did something entirely in violation of the rules of the gun club. He engaged in rapid fire, which you can't do. So when he left, when he walked out of here at 5 o'clock, he got into an argument with the person that they call the range master, the guy who's in charge of all of this shooting. Sirhan had been here 6 times before. He was here on June 2nd, 1968, which was a Sunday, 2 days before the primary, but it was closed. So he couldn't stay. There was no place to go. He went downtown to the Ambassador Hotel, where Bobby Kennedy gave an impromptu speech, just talked to the crowd, his supporters, the gatherers. Sirhan was there, and he had his gun because he brought his gun to the range. Yet he didn't kill Bobby Kennedy. Why didn't he kill Bobby Kennedy on that day? When he was here on that Tuesday, things were different. He had a .22 caliber, 8-shot Iver Johnson. That gun was bought and purchased and given to him by his brother Munir. Munir is his only surviving relative. His father and his mother are dead, and his other brothers and sisters. He was one of 6, just 2 left. So from here, he went downtown. He went to the Wilshire Boulevard exit, parked there, and he went over to the campaign headquarters for a man who was running for Senate, Tom, they called him Kekel, even though his name was spelled K-U-C-H-E-L, which looks more like Kuchel to me. And that was his reason for going downtown, he said. Then he went over to the Ambassador Hotel. He drank some Tom Collins alcoholic beverages. Then he said he started to lose his memory of the events of that day. He went back to his car and he got his gun. He doesn't know why he went back to his car and returned to the Ambassador Hotel, because he said he was so tired and so exhausted he really wanted to go home. But he went back. He said that he was never in his life drunk. But on this particular night, he said, was the first time and the only time that he got drunk on these Tom Collins alcoholic drinks. He was drunk so much, he said, and who knows what was in those drinks, he didn't know what took place that night. He can't remember that night. He can't remember the events of that night. All he knows is that he fired his gun, the same gun he was firing all afternoon. But he never approached Robert Kennedy from behind. He was always in front of Robert Kennedy. And there is absolutely no doubt, it's irrefutable, that Robert Kennedy was killed from a gunshot wound 1.5 inches from behind his right ear. Sirhan could not have fired that shot. As a matter of fact, many witnesses, including Paul Schrade, who was Bobby Kennedy's good friend, he was a UAW official out here in the region of California. Paul Schrade was wounded by one of Sirhan's bullets. And he's absolutely certain that Sirhan did not kill Bobby Kennedy. And he has testified in every one of the recent parole hearings.
All of a sudden, I felt shaking like I was being electrocuted. It grabbed his gun hand, pushed him up against a steam table, flattened him out. He couldn't shoot Robert Kennedy and didn't. He was never in a position to do this. There's strong evidence of a second gunman. They could not match the Kennedy neck bullet. He got hit in the back and the neck. It was the only whole bullet they could work with. It did not match the Sirhan gun. He never shot Robert Kennedy. Massive destruction of evidence right after the trial.
I sympathize with Sirhan, that he took the rap unfairly, unjustly, and dishonestly on the part of the prosecution. And that story has to be told. We have a very strong case based upon not theory, not conspiracies, but based upon the prosecution's own hard evidence, which they tried to destroy a lot of it, but some of it they didn't destroy.
It always went in a bad direction. Once the witnesses and once Sirhan's attorneys began to discuss the evidence, the members of the Parole Commission always rebelled against that by saying, we're not here to discuss the evidence, but yet his attorneys continued to discuss the evidence. And that really angered the commissioners. Sirhan had no chance. This time, though, he changed attorneys, and it was a different approach. It was totally based upon remorse, sorrow, and regret. And Sirhan says, I certainly regret, I'm certainly remorseful for everything I did, for everything I started, because I began the chaos, I began the commotion, which allowed somebody else to kill Bobby Kennedy. And for that, yes, he's guilty, and for that he deserved to be punished. For that he deserved to be punished. And he served over 5 decades in prison. Now is the time for Sirhan to be released, for Sirhan to go home. Things have changed. Nothing's permanent. Everything is temporary. Even Sirhan's anger that night was just a flash. And he doesn't know why he did it. Sirhan loved John Kennedy. And even though he had disagreements with Robert Kennedy, the only evidence we find that Sirhan wanted to kill him was this diary that he wrote, RFK must die, RFK must die, RFK must die, repeatedly. During that parole hearing, the Parole Board of Commissioners decided that it's time that Sirhan should go home. I wrote a letter to the commissioners. I sent it to them on August 4th, and I got a nice reply thanking me for contributing my thoughts. In that letter, I told the commissioners that the time has long passed for Sirhan to be released. He's not violent. In over 5 decades of being incarcerated, there's no written record of any kind of violence. Sirhan was stabbed once, but he never engaged in any retribution. He was never violent. The only time he was ever violent in his life was on the day of the assassination. And on that day, it was also the only time that he had ever been drunk. He was drinking that night Tom Collins drinks. And he was in the company of this woman in the polka dot dress. What she put into his drinks, what he was actually drinking, we'll never know. There is no doubt, and it's indisputable, that when Bobby Kennedy approached Sirhan, Sirhan began to fire. But Sirhan never struck Bobby Kennedy. What he did was very simple. He created a diversion so that somebody else could fire from behind and kill the senator.
The only known recording of the actual gunshots was this recording made by Mr. Brzezinski, and which is somewhat ironic in that Brzezinski was not aware at the time he made the recording that he in fact was still recording. He had set up his microphone and his cassette recorder up at the podium area, had recorded Kennedy's victory statement, and after that had concluded, he came back up to the podium, collecting his microphone and his recorder. And as he was descending the stairs is the point at which the shooting began. He continued to walk into the entryway to the pantry as the shots continued. This is a poor recording, and that's unfortunate. I mean, it would have been lovely if this had been a high-quality recording made with professional equipment right on the scene and as it was happening in the kitchen pantry, but it's not. So we have to make do with what we have. Over this period of the last 3 years, what I found was basically 3 different discoveries. The first discovery was 13 shot sounds over a little bit over a 5-second interval of time. There are 2 shots and then a pause of about 1 1/3 seconds, and then a flurry of succeeding shots, then a number of screams and shouts from that pantry area. Let's just look at part of the shot sequence right up to the scream. The second discovery was that within those 13 shot sounds, there are 2 instances of what I call double shots. And those are 2 shots that occur so close together as to make it really very difficult to believe how they could have possibly come from a single gun. And in fact, last year when the Discovery Times channel hired a gun expert in California, rented an Iver Johnson Cadet 55, which was the weapon that Sirhan had used, and had him under ideal conditions try to shoot it as fast as he could. And I guess the fastest 8-shot average was something like 366 milliseconds between shots. One of the double shots that I found was about 120, 122 milliseconds apart. The other was about 147, 148 milliseconds apart. So about 3 times faster than a gun expert, firing expert, was able to achieve under ideal conditions. And we must remember that at the time that the double shots occurred, Sirhan's gun wrist had been pinned down onto the steam table. If we consider the possibility of 2 guns being fired by 2 different individuals, then we could say that over that same period of time, we would have a random distribution in terms of the occurrence of the shots from those 2 guns, and the likelihood that we would have a couple of virtually overlapping shots occurring from those 2 guns. And that's in fact what we see in these 2 double shot occurrences. As we analyzed further and further, we found a similarity pretty much across the board amongst all of those shot sounds. However, we found one anomaly. With 5 of the gunshots, one frequency presented at a higher level, at 1600 hertz, at one particular frequency. At a total loss for what that possibly could be coming from, we did an independent firing range test using 2 different guns, an Iver Johnson Cadet 55, the same that Sirhan had used. The other one was an H&R 922. The security guard, who was positioned immediately behind Kennedy, in fact had Kennedy's right elbow with his left hand at the time, and was carrying a gun that evening, happened to own an H&R 922 at the time of the shooting. That particular model gun has the same rifling characteristics as the Iver Johnson Cadet 55. The security guard sold that particular weapon a few months after the shooting and not prior to the shooting, as he had initially indicated to the police. So anyway, that seemed to be a good second gun to be using for this independent firing range test. The results of that test showed the same frequency anomaly that we had found in the Brzezinski recording, With the H&R 922, as measured from behind, we found the same frequency anomaly. In other words, this abnormally high level at 1600 hertz. We did not notice any resonance characteristics within the frequency bands with the Iver-Johnson. This provided very, very strong evidence then that the source of the second gun was in fact an H&R 922, and that was fired in that kitchen pantry at the same time that Sirhan's Iver-Johnson Cadet 55 was fired.
If Bobby Kennedy became President of the United States, being elected in 1968, the first thing he would have done was end the Vietnam conflict. It wasn't a war at all. It was a Vietnam military party for Lyndon Johnson and his military industrial friends. I got to go to Indianapolis and campaign for Bobby Kennedy for the primary the weekend before, knocking on doors, handing out literature, and talking to people. Teddy Kennedy was there, and there's 6 of us got on the elevator with him, and we got to talk to him. For a 19-year-old kid, that was interesting, and it was fun. I felt like I was contributing. I was contributing, I felt, to the end of the war. And my father said, don't get involved in those demonstrations and don't do any of that stuff. And I had to respect my father, but I still wanted to do something to contribute to the end of the Vietnam War because I knew it was wrong. When I heard that Bobby Kennedy was killed, I had woke up to my clock radio, which had the news on it, that Bobby Kennedy was shot overnight. I was shocked. I really couldn't believe it was happening. Sirhan said that his desire to remove RFK had become an unshakable obsession. That night at the Ambassador Hotel, there were people there who were inappropriate for a political rally. People who didn't belong there, people who had no business being there from a political perspective. Take a look at some of the videotape that proves exactly what I'm saying. People who knew those members of the audience who had no business being there. What was their reason for being there?
Agent number 1, the Indian man in the white shirt at the back of the room, moments after the speech and just before the shooting. I think this man is David Morales. Moments after the shooting, agent number 2, Gordon Campbell, walks from the direction of the pantry with a small container in his hand, as a Latin man waves him towards an exit. 30 minutes after the shooting, here is agent 1 again, David Morales. I also found several photographs of these agents earlier in the evening. Here, Agent 2, Gordon Campbell, stands in the ballroom hours before the shooting with a third agent. These officers worked together in 1963 at JM Wave, the CIA's Miami base for its secret war on Castro. Bradley Ayres worked with these men at JM Wave and first confirmed my identification of Morales.
This definitely, from the profile, is hugely similar. The body language is very, very much characteristic of Morales. See how he moves back and forth very casually, does not attract attention to himself. That is no question.
Bradley also recognized his former case officer, Gordon Campbell.
Yeah, that's excellent. I could certainly verify 90% ID of Gordon Campbell, and less a little hair, as I remembered him. The facial features are certainly his. Absolutely. Obviously, the two of them are together. They're looking for a way out because this fellow is guiding him, showing him an exit. Obviously, he's got something in his hand. I think it's impossible to determine what it is.
That's Dave Morales.
Really?
Yeah, I'm virtually certain.
It's very, very much characteristic.
Yeah, I mean, in terms, I mean, that's Morales. That's Morales. Yeah, I knew Morales quite well. He worked in the CIA station in Havana when I was third secretary of the political section, and got to know him fairly well and saw him again a number of times. He came to Buenos Aires when I was political counselor down there, and we had dinner at a friend's house one evening. So I have no hesitation in saying that's Morales.
What was their reason for being there? Well, when we look at the results of what happened that night, we understand why they were there and their purpose. The Sirhan murder of RFK is no different from the Oswald murder of JFK. Neither one of these people, neither one of these two accused assassins actually completed the deed, but they were blamed for that. And now Sirhan is going to be getting out of prison, and I'm really excited for that, because I expect that Sirhan is going to be able to speak and say things and do things that he couldn't do before going into prison. He's going to be able to speak honestly, and he's going to be able to speak openly. I firmly believe what he said when he said that he doesn't remember what happened. I told the panel in my letter, I was a victim of Bobby Kennedy's murder, and I forgave Sirhan. If Bobby Kennedy had been elected president and there had been no Vietnam War, I would not have been drafted in 1971. And all of the mothers and fathers and their families, their kids who were watching the death and destruction in the Vietnam War on their nightly news while they were having dinner, we too were victims of the Vietnam conflict. What was happening in Vietnam was totally wrong. The Vietnam political process was none of our business. There was no purpose in being there, and the results speak for themselves. 50 years later, we can see that it was a waste of time and money and 58,000 young American lives, not counting those who were injured and whose lives were destroyed through injury or suicide. Sirhan is no longer the violent person he was for those few moments the morning of June 5th, 1968. I forgive him. As a nation, we should forgive him. Let him come and live his few remaining years in peace here in this house.